Thank you for joining us this evening. You are now watching the second episode of Health Huddle, where we will be discussing interesting topics about healthcare, wellness, and genetics. So this is actually a new initiative by the team because we want to introduce you guys to interesting things that you may not know about, especially in terms of healthcare and wellness. Today we will be discussing on the topic genetic cloning and the return of dinosaurs. So the three of us will be your co-hosts for today. Here we have John, who is a experienced sci-fi enthusiast, and he's also the co-founder and business operations manager of Advanx Health. And here we also have Lynette, who is a long-time science geek. Okay, so she is also the scientific operations technologist, aka the lab manager of Advanx Health. Basically, she's the one who handles all the DNA samples. Okay, and I myself, my name is Jane. I am a movie enthusiast, and I am basically the audience representative for today because I have very basic knowledge on science. So, I will be relying a lot on John and Lynette's expertise for today's discussion. Okay, so let's dive into today's discussion. So we will be discussing on genetic cloning, and I'm sure that many of you have heard about genetic cloning. Okay, it's a very common theme in many sci-fi movies, animation, and even comics. Okay, so just some example of movies that talk about genetic cloning. So firstly, that's Jurassic Park and Jurassic World, which they clone dinosaurs, they recreate them from uh, DNA that they got from like fossils. There's also this movie called The Sixth Day, which stars Arnold Schwarzenegger. Okay, where he goes home to find a doppelganger of himself at home. And there's also the Canadian series called Orphan Black, where the protagonist comes across multiple characters who looks exactly like herself. So these are just some examples of um, movies that talk about genetic cloning, and I'm sure there's much more out there. So, but we want to know how true is genetic cloning based on the portrayal in the movies. So, a question to John and Lynette. First question is genetic cloning real? And is it possible to clone a living being as a whole?
Lynette, go ahead first.
Yeah, sure. So, genetic cloning is actually real, which I think most of the people they heard of. I mean, you guys have heard of Dolly the sheep. So actually, Dolly the sheep is born in 5th July 1996, but it's already passed away due to the progressive lung disease. So gene cloning is actually exists, but if uh and also it is possible to clone a living being as a whole, but only in animal, not in human yet.
So, can we talk a bit about, more about Dolly the sheep? Why was Dolly the sheep created? How was Dolly cloned?
So Dolly the sheep, they clone it by using a technique by take a cell is taken from the donor's mammary gland, and then they insert the nucleus into another cell that doesn't have the nucleus. So it will they so this is the way that how they clone this Dolly the sheep. And then actually it's from the three mothers. One is the one that provide the egg, another one that provide the DNA, and then another one is the one that carried the clone embryo. So this technique we call that as a somatic cell nuclear transfer. So Dolly actually is the one lamb that uh, survive as until adulthood from 277 attempts. So it's actually very, very, very rare lah for this experiment.
So yes, I think it totally resonates with Lynette in this part. Genetic cloning has shown some quite an impressive improvement. It is to
Mm.
show that it's possible, but it's also pretty difficult to execute. And a lot of times, it's only execute in I think non non-living non-living organisms, or let's say like fruit. For example, fruits. Fruits are there are fruits that are genetically modified and sort of cloned in a sense because they actually has the same genetic sequences in in the fruits. That's why there are crops that are susceptible to viruses if they are exposed to it, and there's no resistance to it. It's because of the genetic, how to say, the homogeneity, because they are similar in terms of genetics and their immunity are similar.
Yeah.
So aside from Dolly the sheep, which is probably one of the most popular genetic cloning cases that we hear about, I think that we many people when they think of cloning, they think like, oh, dinosaurs. Realistically, is it actually possible to recreate something like dinosaurs that are already extinct? Like, is it possible to take DNA from, for example, their fossils and to recreate them?
Yeah, let me probably give some imagination from our listeners here. So if let's say we are able to fully sequence the DNA of a dinosaur from a fossil, then it's possible to put that sequence into a cell, because our DNA sequences are basically nucleic acids, like blocks of nucleic acids, is able to be programmed. But of course, the method of doing so is terribly tedious, and the failure rate is very high. So that's one thing. But then, in order to extract enough DNA samples to sequence the full DNA map from a dinosaur fossil, that itself is very challenging, because DNA fossils are only found in limited fossils. Not all fossils contains full, I mean, DNA samples from the dinosaur. I think that will be one realistic issues that stops this from happening. However, talking about imaginary technicality wise, I think it's fully possible if enough money being put into the technology.
So,
Yeah.
in this case, because it's technically impossible at this point because of the lack of DNA samples, right? So, what
Yeah.
if there is a specific species of, for example, a certain type of tiger, and somehow they manage to preserve like the full set of DNA? Then would it be possible to recreate it?
Actually, besides that, then the DNA part, actually,
Mm-hmm.
if there is a nucleus cell that already preserved from the extinct animal, if we have got the preserved nucleus and we can insert the nucleus into another cell that doesn't have the nucleus, we also can bring back the extinct animal from with this way. Yeah.
This is one possible way for us to sort of rekindle some of the extinct
Yes.
animals. However, this is theoretically possible. However, realistically, it's very difficult to
Yeah.
happen.
It would be a very, very long way to go lah.
Mm.
Mm.
So it's also a process that takes a lot of money and time to
Yes,
achieve lah.
and also ethical issue.
I see.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So if that's the case, because we've only been talking about cloning of animals, so what about humans? Is it possible, like in the Sixth Day or in Orphan Black, where they clone a human being like this? Because like for example, I'm alive now. You can get my DNA and everything. So is it possible?
Yeah, it's possible actually, but for now, for our technology, we only manage to like clone for certain organ,
Mm-hmm.
which
Organs.
yeah. So we actually in human cloning we can separate into two parts lah. One is for therapeutic purpose, another one is for reproductive purpose. So if for therapeutic purpose, it would be cloning the organs for transplantation purpose or some medication, I mean pharmaceutical drugs research. Yeah, for this is the therapeutic use. But for the reproductive cloning, it will be like making the entire human lah, creating the entire human. But this is currently is not really work for now. Yeah, because it's actually quite a very big project, and yeah, and it also involved in ethical issue as well. Yeah.
So I believe there are also movies that shows genetic cloning in humans where they store in a form of substitutes, then they sort of replace the mind from one body to another body. So
Yeah.
um, I think cloning a full human is still far from reach. It's still far from
Yes.
reach. Cloning, I think also because the complexity of a human, development of a human, what do they call it, a
Yes.
fetus, is terribly difficult to duplicate. But then there are like a more easier experiment done on like viruses or bacteria, where they clone bacteria and they are
Yeah, correct.
identical. Those are achieved, I think, in the lab. I believe there are.
Yes.
So I think the next question would be, even if we successfully clone a person exactly like you, it wouldn't be the same, because I think um, there are shows, in the movies, they say they clone like exactly at that point of time. But in reality, when you clone something, it requires time to grow. So you probably can clone like a baby self of you, but it will take another 5 to 10 years in order to grow to where you are right now. That's the interesting part.
Yeah.
And another thing that we probably would think, are we able to store our memory and our conscious, and to really move from one to another?
I see. Okay. So what we know now is that genetic cloning is actually more used in like cloning organs.
Yes.
So can we talk a little bit more about uh how what is it used for? Why are they cloning organs? Is it just for research, or is it actually used for transplantation as well?
Currently, for now, it's only in a research stage because of the ethical issue. And but they are doing research in cloning the organs for transplantation, and also to research in the drugs metabolism in an organ. Yeah. So mostly this is the part lah for the cloning or in organs, and it's really only active in research lah for now, but they are not medically practiced anywhere in the world until the last year, July 2020. Yeah.
I think the one thing, the reason why organ is being cloned is because the risk of rejections from donors. Because technically, if it's derived from your own genetic information, when it's being transplanted into your own body, it may result in lesser rejection, because the body would recognize it as your own. That's the assumption. That's why there are a lot of research driving this area. I mean, in this area itself. And also another reason is organ donors are very hard to get. The
Yes,
list goes
correct.
on in terms of organ transplantation. If this technology really able to prove its worthiness, I think it's definitely a gain for humanity. Yeah.
Okay.
Mm. Yeah.
So that's for humans. So here we also have some news from the US, where animal cloning is talked about in the food safety aspect. So from that we can know that um cloning is used in animals, and they have declared the FDA has declared that it's safe to eat cloned animals. So what do you guys think about that, like cloning animals for food?
Mm.
For me, I think cloning animals, the priority actually is not for food, but it's for breeding purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Because imagine if the farmer, they can control they can use the gene from a very very good breed,
Mm-hmm.
and they clone it, and then they'll get a very good another good quality animals. Then they won't really sell off or slaughter the animal for 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 to process it as a food, right? They will keep it and then keep using it as a good quality one for product reproduction. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it's mainly more on breeding rather than as a food.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Mm.
I agree on Lynette's point as well, because genetic cloning, I think, for breeders is more on the desirable traits of a particular animal as a breed. And also like in certain crops, there are, in terms of, let's say, size, or let's say in terms of cows or milk production, or feed conversion rate in terms of meat producing poultries. it's
Yes.
all it's all about the desirable traits of a certain breed that they want to preserve. So genetic cloning is one way of them preserving it. I think in the following section we're also going to talk about genetic editing,
Mm-hmm.
genetic editing via CRISPR. So that's another way they're approaching it. However, cloning seems to be one of the options for certain poultries, because it provides better traits for the breeder. Yeah.
Yes.
In a sense, basically what you're saying is that when people choose to clone livestock, it's probably because, for example, there's this cow that has really good uh I don't know, meat quality, for example, and so they want to clone a few versions of it so that it can continue to reproduce that line of heritage for future production or
Yes.
whatever. So that's what you're saying, lah.
Yes. So
Yes.
so for, so
Okay.
so so like for example, horses, they have certain breeds that are more valuable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So in terms of genetic cloning, you sort of preserve this trait, assuming that's the assumption, you preserve this trait, and you don't need to go through multiple breeding process to sort of hit the jackpot again. You can
Mm-hmm.
straight
Yes.
away sort of copy paste that genetic information and have the exact breed of horses coming out, from that. So that's the plus point, from the scientific perspective.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yes.
So there are also some news that we have heard of about people cloning their pets. It took 67,000 pounds to clone their dog.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
what do you guys think about this?
yeah.
Mm,
Before that, Lynette, do you have a pet?
yeah, I have.
Would you clone your pet?
Like
No.
if your pet is maybe like very old, and it's gonna die, you wouldn't, so
No.
that it can
Yeah.
stay with you forever.
I think
Uh,
it's a sentiment for the pet,
yeah.
because I would say if you clone the pet is a new life. It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
carry memory from your previous
Yes.
Yeah.
experience with the pet. It's basically you're just getting the same breed of the dog, again.
Mm-hmm.
Mm,
For me, I also wouldn't do so, because it's just a different cat or dog, different pet already.
yeah.
Carrying the same genetic information doesn't mean it's the
Yes,
same
correct.
dog.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah. So
Mm-hmm.
cloning is actually not duplicating another thing. It's just that you have the gene from the pets from your pets, and then
Mm-hmm.
you clone another one, but without the memory, without the same habits. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like an identical twin.
Yes.
We
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they have different characteristic, different memory. Yeah, something like that.
So
So
while we're on this, so does it mean that gene does not determine like your personality or like your preferences? It
yeah.
like your lifestyle after birth is actually more important in nurturing a specific type of habits and personality.
Yes, and your environment as well.
Mm-hmm. So
Yeah.
even if I recreate, let's say somebody cloned me today, for example, but you know, this clone, I don't know, lives like a princess and whatever. So this person might end up just behave completely differently, even look
Yeah.
differently as well.
Yes.
Mm.
It you just be like your identical twin.
Mm-hmm.
It's just
Yeah.
it will
I
be
think
like that.
it's also we can come back to another assumption of sci-fi where they have this parallel universe theory.
Mm.
There's another version of you living in the parallel universe.
Mm-hmm.
Even if the same, is the same person, but it probably will be a different you
Mm-hmm.
because
Yeah,
of
correct.
different things that happen. Of
Mm-hmm.
course,
Mm,
genetics has a factor in certain things. So, for example, your hair color will definitely be the same, your skin color will
Mm-hmm.
be the same, your eye
yes.
color,
Mm-hmm.
and probably the way you grow, the rate of you growing is almost certainly the same. Of course, it also depends on how much nutrition you take in, how much work you work out, you do. But some
Yes.
of the basic traits are predetermined. You cannot change unless you dye your hair or you, you do whatever things to your eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
But even so, in a theory of parallel universe, there will be a different version of you that is totally different from where you are right now. So I think it applies to genetic cloning. Even if
Mm-hmm.
the same genetic information is being cloned, it will not be you entirely the same.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Correct.
So I guess in movies they kind of just use genetic cloning as a very convenient way to explain like why is there a different person that looks the same and you know has the same thought, or you can like transfer your conscience over. But obviously it's not possible. So I know there are a lot of ethical concerns on genetic cloning or basically just modifying humans in general.
Mm.
Sparks a lot of ethical concerns and debate. So there is this technology called CRISPR, right? That John also has mentioned earlier.
Yep.
Yeah.
So maybe John, you can introduce to everyone what is CRISPR.
So CRISPR is basically genetic scissors. So CRISPR is like a scissor that cuts a certain part of our genes and pastes it into another gene. So right now, from my own understanding, CRISPR is being used in a lot of biotech fields in terms of selecting desirable traits and sort of move them into a particular crop. So, for example, there are a certain traits in, for example, orange, in terms of sweetness or in terms of climate, how to say, response to climate, their crop yield. Researchers have found this particular gene plays a role in this particular phenotype or presentation. So they would cut that particular gene and put into the new line of the breed of the orange.
Mm-hmm.
So CRISPR is being used in this way most of the time. It's a convenient way, but right now also the application is limited to like fruits, crops, certain viruses, bacteria to produce certain molecules that we want. So just for a fact, for the people who are listening, previously insulin that we normally know for diabetics, insulins are actually extracted from actual, I think it's a cow or pig pancreas. So they
Mm-hmm.
sort of separate it out. So that's why in the very very early stage when insulin was introduced, it's very expensive. However, using a genetic biotechnology, they are able to have the insulin producing gene, put into a bacteria called like E. coli, and they can mass produce this insulin via a bioreactor. Basically, it's like a tank of E. coli that produce only insulin. That's why we are able to mass produce this. So a lot of similar technologies has been done, very very earlier on. It has been a mature technology, but not
Mm-hmm.
applied in human until recent. Until recent, yeah.
Okay, so um, basically this is like a gene editing tool, right?
Yeah.
So
Yes.
I know that CRISPR has been a pretty popular thing in the science field right now. There's a lot of debates about it. There's also been news that there was a man who was jailed for misusing the technology. Am I right?
Yep.
So maybe just for everyone's benefit, maybe have a better idea of what CRISPR supposedly can do. So in a lot of movies in Hollywood, they've actually also talked about CRISPR. It's not something that's totally unfamiliar to everyone, but maybe you don't know it as CRISPR. You just know it as like, oh, gene modification, but it's actually this technology called CRISPR. Okay, so
But they do have I think they do have a movie that particularly mentioned CRISPR. I
yeah.
think we'll show the slides
So
later. Which
if you can see right now, this is a movie called Rampage, that features The Rock, and it actually talks about this pair of siblings who use CRISPR to create genetic weapons that can turn any animal into aggressive, and faster and stronger versions of themselves. So this is one way that people assume that CRISPR can be used. There's also another movie called 𝗀cie. It's a Korean movie on Netflix, and it basically talks about this company that genetically modifies pigs. So they are basically like super pigs, and they are created as an experiment and later to be turned into food, basically manufactured for like bacon and whatever. And there's also the beloved Captain America. So technically in they did not explicitly talk about CRISPR in his backstory in the movies or the comics, but how Captain America became a super soldier was from a super soldier serum that was injected into him, which modified his genes. So it works pretty similarly to CRISPR as well. And finally, there's also Deadpool, who also got injected this serum that activates any mutated genes that's lurking in his DNA, and as a result, he obtained increased recovery ability. So these are just some ways that movies have portrayed them, and of course, we know that movies are exaggerating how CRISPR works. So what's the latest development in the current technology of CRISPR? How are things actually like realistically? And are any of these movie examples like possible technically?
So for now, what I've known that there's one new release article, I would say news lah,
Mm-hmm.
stated that the CRISPR technology now has been used to treat human retinal degeneration.
Mm.
Yeah, it's just yesterday news.
Oh,
Yeah, so yes, it's from New York. So this is let me explain a little bit what is human retinal degeneration. It is a disease that can that can cause blindness. So they is still in the research state, but the purpose is to um prevent this this disease happen. Because this is a kind of inherited disease. Yes, so they are going to prevent this inherited disease to happen. So this is what the latest one
mm-hmm.
for CRISPR. And for the superhuman, superhuman with the very strong strength,
Yeah,
everything.
yeah.
Yeah, for that part, I think I'm not sure, but I think it's possible, but not now. Maybe in far future.
Maybe in 100 years, for example.
Yeah, because it's quite very new field to
Mm.
explore.
Is
Mm.
this a very new technology? How long has this technology been around?
Uh, it's it's considered new, but it's not very new. It's already quite some time
Mm-hmm.
for this technology. Yeah.
Mm.
I think CRISPR has exists in labs for quite some time. It's just recently, I don't say recently, it's a recent 10 to 20 years they want to put into actual clinical use where they want to use this as a potential cure for certain genetic diseases.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
To change to modify single gene mutation related diseases means what does it mean by single gene mutation is the reason why you're having this disease is because just one genetic mutation. So if it's just one, it can be very targeted. If it's a
Mhm.
multi-gene or if it's a chromosomal, then it might be a little bit difficult.
Mhm.
So talking
Yes.
about CRISPR, I think in the case of the Captain America or Deadpool, or in our comments, also mentioned Spider-Man
Spider-Man,
or
𝗙cie𝗰𝗶𝗀𝗀.
Man. I think is on the accuracy or specificity of the scissors, or
Mhm.
inserting, where do you insert the gene, and how sure are you are putting it in the right place.
Mhm.
So
Yes.
because we have a very complex DNA structure, you don't know whether you are putting the book in the I mean the putting the gene in the right place. So
Yes.
it
Correct.
doesn't work like a library. You have a A to Z, 1 to 10. We need to be molecularly very specific in that sense. So similarly on how you cutting that gene as well. So I think that's the challenge right here.
Yes.
Um, to find the specificity of the CRISPR, Cas9 on the particular gene that we want to target.
Mhm.
Uh, However, it offers a lot of potential in terms of like cancer therapy, genetic disease therapy. So that's why CRISPR has moved from lab bench to clinical
Mhm.
over
Yep.
I think the past for 50 years. I think that's a huge improvement. I think there's huge potential there.
So,
Yep.
because this CRISPR, it basically kind of edits your gene, right? So I'm sure there's a lot of uh people who would like talk about ethical concerns and like debate about should you actually let nature do its work, or should you actually use technology to maybe save the life of somebody. So what do you guys think about that? Do you think that the pros of using CRISPR in clinical practices outweighs the ethical concern?
Um, I'll go first. I think for CRISPR in clinical usage, it needs to comes with evidence to sort of support and prove the beneficial effects of that CRISPR. The reason being is, like I said, the accuracy of the CRISPR to cut at the right place and replace the same part again. Okay, even if that is achieved, we wouldn't know by replacing that gene does it solve the problem. Is
Mm,
there any long-term implication? Uh, Sometimes it doesn't simply mean that replacing that gene you are solving the problem. By replacing that gene, you might cause other problems. So similarly to a Chinese scientist who genetically edited the baby, for the HIV protection. I think
Yep.
the criticism comes where you don't have sufficient evidence to show if you edit the gene, first of all, is it protective? Second of all, is there any detrimental consequences in the future when they grow up?
mm,
Because sometimes I would say for sure, researchers out there will agree with me. We don't really understand our genes that well yet to
Yep.
really pay God into this.
mhm.
CRISPR itself as a technology, I think, is very matured, but how we use it is I would say to proceed with caution. That's my take.
Lynette, what about you?
I'm more likely same like John because you cannot make sure that you are cutting the right part. And yeah, and even if you are not replacing it, even you are removing certain gene, certain part, because there is a sometimes the mutation caused because of some addition to the gene, and if you want to repair it, you have to cut it off and then let it to repair itself. So you might not sure whether you is it right for you to cut it, and how is it after it repair, how the gene going to work. We are not sure
Mm,
about that. Yeah, so
okay.
Yeah,
this
I
is
think in
the
addition to that
concern.
also, our body actually tends to also change. Sometimes we certain cells mutate. That's why we have cancer. The reason
Mm-hmm.
why we have cancer is because certain gene sequence are being changed throughout the day,
Yes.
and like what Lynette said, either by deleting it, adding addition, those are all we call genetic mutations. A single
Yes.
gene addition would change the whole sequence. So that's why usage of this CRISPR is very still yet to be discovered.
Mm.
Yes.
So, does that mean that for us to achieve something like, like the movies to, make superhumans, or to achieve like uh improved recovery abilities, all these, it's not entirely impossible, but maybe in a very, very, very far future.
Yep.
I think
We
in,
need.
in relation to this, we probably would need to discuss in another show, in another episode,
Mm-hmm.
where there are people that has pre-born with special abilities that
Mm-hmm.
are inherited through genetics,
Mm-hmm.
increased strength or increased durability,
Memory.
Yeah.
memory,
Mm-hmm.
things like that. There are certain genetics role into it. However, combining all this together via editing is like putting all the good things into one place. That we
Yeah.
are, I think it's not so certain yet. It only exists in sci-fi right now,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of like a
Mm.
perfect gene. You want to
Mm-hmm.
put everything perfect into a gene, whether it
Yeah.
comes out a perfect person or not. Yes.
Okay. But I guess at the end of the day, all these portrayals of genetics in all these movies are just very convenient for the plot. So just a reminder to everyone, please don't take all these movies too seriously. Most of the science in there are not real. You know. Okay, so let's open to some questions for the floor. So yeah, please comment your question below. If you have anything that you're curious about in relation to genetic cloning and genetic engineering. Um yeah, so we actually have a comment here about Spider-Man 𝗙cie𝗹𝗹𝗀. I personally think that that's not so much on genetic engineering, because like Spider-Man, he got bitten and he turned into Spider-Man,
But
right?
for the record, is bitten by, I think it's the
Or a
spider is,
radioactive spider
yes,
or something, right?
the spider is, I think,
Mm,
radioactive or
mm.
genetically mutated.
Mutated
Mm.
spider.
Yeah.
I think this is also another very popular topic in movies, like the hybrid between human and animals. So maybe we'll
Or
talk
like
about it in
mutants
another
like
session.
X-Men.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. We'll do that
Yes.
in another session.
Yeah, we'll do that in another
Yeah.
session.
Yeah.
So any questions so far? Um so far, if there's not much question, then we'll proceed to, wrap up this session today.
Yep.
Okay, so I guess all in all, to basically conclude, all the movies portrayals are like the perfect theory of how these technologies will work, but it does definitely does not reflect our current technology and development progress. But there is a potential, hopefully in the next maybe 50 or 100 years, that we may be able to achieve that. Am I right?
Yeah, I think it's definitely offer room for imagination,
Mm-hmm.
for us to
Yeah.
look into the future. However, there are elements of drama, story
Mm-hmm.
inside, which might be
Yeah.
a little bit exaggerated at times. But I think certain basis of it might be true, but not all of them.
So if
Yep.
is for the both of you personally, which of these do you hope to actually turn into a reality? Lynette?
Um. What you mean by wish of this?
Like which of these movies portrayal of all these genes
Oh,
do you wish to actually be real or be able to achieve one day in the science field?
if we can have superpowers, like the Marvels, the Avengers.
Yeah, I think everyone wants to be a
Yeah, I think everyone
superhuman.
wants that.
So you can buy your superpowers. Insert which gene for you to gain certain superpowers. Yeah, in the future.
Yeah.
I think that
Yeah.
will be probably the next blockbuster movies title again.
Yep. Yep.
John, what
I think
about
for
you?
me,
How
Yeah.
about John?
for me, I think it's on cloning. I think yourself and sort of relive. You know, who knows? You can relive your childhood again with the same memory. Who knows?
But you
Throwing
technically you won't ever die lah, because you can just keep cloning yourself.
yeah. So
Then
you
you
can
keep cloning, cloning, cloning.
yeah cloning and living the life again. I don't know. It will be interesting to see that happen. Yeah.
Okay. I think for me personally, I kind of wish like Jurassic Park would be true. Not in the sense that I want dinosaurs to come back, but like I do hope that they can bring back some extinct animals. You know, it would be nice to see the world populated with more species of animals again. So
Like mammoths and saber tooths again.
yeah, it would be pretty cool to see those animals in real life.
Yeah, especially the dodo bird.
Yeah, dodo bird. We can only wish, and hopefully there will be scientific breakthrough in the
Hopefully
future.
one day we can see that.
Yeah. All right, so that wraps up today's session. Thank you guys very much for joining us today for our discussion in genetic cloning and the return of dinosaurs. So thank you very much for joining us and have a good evening.
See
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Perspective of children with learning difficulty, they must be struggling a lot too. So in terms of this struggle, they may also experience something like maybe some isolation because they